So let's talk a little bit about the struggles people have when they're using P6. Now, Sue and I have both worked with P6 for many years, as I'm sure a lot of you have as well. And one of the things that we often forget as P6 users is that P6 can be quite difficult for new people to learn how to use and can be quite difficult to administer. The average power user doesn't see those struggles that people have around P6. We'll talk a little bit in more detail about what those struggles look like. So the first one is, as I mentioned, administering P6. Now, we have some clients who have many databases, and they're required by their clients to have a different database to make sure that all of their data is secure and that there's no risk of people seeing each other's data. So every time they have a new client or a new job, they've got to spin up a new database. Now, in the existing databases, they've got users, they've got security profiles, um, they've got coding structures, they've got all these kind of things predefined, layouts, filters, all that sort of thing. And yet, every time they create a new database, they've got to create all this stuff from scratch because there's no easy way within P6 to move that stuff around. So that's the first challenge people have. The second challenge is more around users who have trouble developing projects. And this is when you've got a whole portfolio of projects and you want to come up with some standardized processes. Now, P6 does have template projects that you can create, but one of the things that's often difficult is taking that template project and scaling it up or scaling it down or making changes to it in order to fit the current project requirements. Now, P6-Loader can be used to build projects very quickly and very simply. It can also be used to code projects in a consistent manner. I'll talk little bit more about that in a moment. Data integration. Well, we all know that no software system exists in a vacuum anymore. What people want to see is they want to see some information from P6 gathered with some information from Oracle Financials or SAP, maybe some information pulled from a planning system. Maybe they have a turnaround planning system or a timesheet system, and all this information needs to be pulled together so that people can see it in one place. And then we can develop dashboards and we can do all kinds of great things with that information, but first we need to pull it together. Well, P6-Loader is really effective this way because P6-Loader lets you take information from just about anywhere and bring it into P6 or extract information from P6 and send it on somewhere else. Um, if you want to build an integration, let's say that you have an ERP system that doesn't have an out-of-the-box link to P6. Well, you can very quickly build an integration using P6-Loader just by dumping information from that system into Excel, which virtually any system will do, format it in P6 format and bring it in, and away you go. So some of our clients even use P6-Loader to trial integrations because what they want to do is they want to see if it works before they spend a whole bunch of money writing a program. They want to make sure that, in fact, the data is moving the way they want, and they can very quickly make changes and tweak things until it's exactly right using P6-Loader. Team engagement. Well, as I said before, most of us are P6 users and we've used P6 for many years, and P6 is pretty easy for us. What we forget is that P6 has a pretty steep learning curve. And if you think back to when you first started using P6, it was a bit of a struggle. After a few months, you figured it out and charged ahead, but it probably was a bit of a struggle for that first little bit. Well, oftentimes we end up with users who we need to get into P6, but we really don't want to spend months and months training them on P6 and getting them up to speed or sending them off for a 102 course. Um, it might be a lot easier to just let them do updates through Excel. So we can take the activities out of P6, put them in Excel, send them to people, they can update them, send them back, we can review them, and if we're happy with them, we can upload them very quickly. Virtually everybody working these days knows how to use Excel, but not that many people know how to use P6. Consistent portfolios. I mentioned before that the real push that we're getting is people really want to be moving towards a consistency in their data so they can build things like data cubes or they can build dashboards and all this sort of thing for managers. But in order to do that, we need consistent data between all of our various projects. So, if I'm say trying to build a turnaround dashboard and I've got a bunch of different sites and I want to be able to pull all that information from all those sites, well, they all have to have the same activity codes and they all have to have the same user defined fields, because when I pull it all together, I need some basis of comparison. Now that's easy enough with ongoing projects because we can tell the users, okay, you need to start using this code everywhere. But what about all the old projects that you want to be able to pull in to your data cube? They're not going to be coded. And to have somebody go through and try and code them after the fact is pretty hard work. But with P6-Loader, we can just backfill anything we need to through Excel. So it's very quick and very easy. So how does it work? Well, first of all, there's a bunch of options as to how P6-Loader can be implemented. It can be on-premise, so if you've got your P6 in a company data center, P6-Loader can be there as well. It can be in the cloud, in which case P6 is in the cloud, uh, maybe Excel's in the cloud, P6-Loader's in the cloud, and all those clouds are just talking to each other. Or it can be something in between, where some of it is on-prem and some of it's in the cloud. So you have all of these different options. Now, as far as the technology goes, um, there's a bunch of ways that you can get information in and out of P6. Let's start with the oldest one, the SDK. So that used to stand for the Software Developers Kit. Now, the SDK was developed probably around 2010, maybe even earlier than that. Um, and the idea that Primavera had was that you could basically make a connection to a what they called the SDK, and it kind of looked like a database, and you could pull information out and push information into P6 using that tool, using Excel or Microsoft Access or something like that, most likely Access. But there's a few challenges with it. The first one is you had to be an admin super user to use it, which meant that anybody who had to load anything had to be an admin super user, which kind of breaks the P6 security model. It did validate your data and check to make sure it was good. And it did allow you to access global data, so that was good. It allowed you to selectively extract data, and it allowed you to work with multiple projects. But it had another problem, and that's it's no longer supported by Oracle. So although it still works in some cases, it doesn't work in others. And if you screw something up, there's no support for it. So the next thing that we had available was in P6, you have the ability to use Excel import and export directly. So that's good because there's data validation there. It's supported. You can selectively extract data to Excel and then you can write it back. But there's a few problems. The first one is you can't access any global data. It's basically um, project and resource data only. So you can't create a user profile or a layout or anything like that using it. Um, it doesn't have any security around it. So if you can get to the project, you can basically import anything you want, and it only does one project at a time. So then a few people came up with these tools where you could take an XER, which is Primavera's native export format, and you could manipulate that XER. But that causes a bunch of problems. So although it does do multiple projects, basically have to extract an entire project with all of its information. And because it's a project export import process, again, there's no global data. The other issues are that there's no security around it and there's no data validation. So anybody who can do an import can import anything. And it's not supported by Oracle. In fact, Oracle says if you mess up your database using an XCR, you're on your own. So um, it's pretty risky to be manipulating those XCRs. And we had an example where a client suddenly couldn't get into their database. They started getting an error message whenever anybody tried to log in. And it took us a while, but we eventually tracked it down to someone had manipulated an XCR and trying to be helpful had taken an EPS level activity code and changed it to a global level activity code in the XCR file, but they spelt the word global incorrectly. So when P6 tried to read the activity dictionary, it came across as value it didn't know what to do with, and it just crashed. And it took us probably a full day to figure out what had happened and fix the problem. Um, but it could have been much, much worse, because there's no data validation. It just whatever's in there gets read into the tables, and if it's not good data, it will cause P6 to crash. So P6-Loader um, does allow you to access all the information in P6. So you want to create users, you want to create security profiles, EPS, OBS, etc. We'll talk about all the things you can do. It does all of it. It works through P6 security because it works through P6 web services and or the API, which means that if I have access to a project in P6, I would have access to it through P6-Loader. If I don't have access to it in P6, I would not have access to it in P6-Loader. If I don't have access to edit resources, I can't do it using P6-Loader. So whatever you set up as security in P6 will be exactly the same security I have for P6-Loader. The data is all validated before it comes in. So P6-Loader checks it because, again, it's going through the Primavera web services. So if it's not a valid entry, the web service will throw an error and stop. And so you'll know immediately if you've spelled, um, the word global incorrectly, for example. It'll immediately stop you in your tracks. It's supported by Oracle because we're using their APIs and web services to do it. Not only that, but Oracle actually sells our tools on the Oracle Primavera web marketplace. So they actually have actively support and sell it. Um, it allows you to do selective extraction, so you can pull out whatever you need, and you can pull out as few or as many projects as you want, including baselines. So in P6-Loader, we have what we call subject areas. We have global data, resource and role data, project and activity info, and then we have utilities. So let's talk a little bit about what's in there. So the global data, we have user info and security profiles, EPS, OBS. I'm not going to go through the whole list, um, but all the things listed there are accessible. Under resources and roles, we basically can access anything in there. Project details, including full baseline information, can be pulled into P6-Loader, and activity information as well. Now, we on our utilities, we have the ability to roll down activity codes, calendars, um, which lets you take those things which perhaps are at the global level and make them project specific. So if I've got a global activity code that I really only use in one project, I can convert it to a project activity code. I can read and write XERs and XMLs. I can clean XERs. I can even run job services. So after I finish a load, I can tell P6 to reschedule all the projects that I've updated. Um, you can move layouts and reports from one database to another, and you can back up your database as well. So all these things are available in the utilities. So when I want to do the first thing I typically do when I'm working with P6-Loader is I'll extract the data I want to manage. It can be global, user, or project information. And when it's projects, I can pull out as many projects or as few projects as I like. I can pull out baseline projects, resources, resource assignments, expenses, etc. All that's available. Um, then what I do is I manipulate my data in Excel so I can make whatever changes I want to make. So I can run Excel macros, I can use Excel forms, I can use that to then pull data from some other system in a format that maybe isn't aligned with P6, and I can run a little macro to get it in the right format, load it into P6, and I'm done. All right, so let's take a look at how it works. So I'm going to hand it over to Sue, and Sue's going to walk us through some examples using P6-Loader. So Sue, I'm going to give you control of the session.
Got it. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm going to just share my screen here so that we can kind of see what the tool can do. Um, keep in mind that I'm just going to touch the tip of the iceberg on some of the things that P6-Loader can do. Um, One thing is we can hook it or point it at several different databases. So one copy of P6-Loader can point to many databases and you can use it in any database that you want. So I'm just going to select the database and I'm going to sign in. Um, as Ian said, one of the first things that uh, when working with data a lot of times is that we want to extract what the data we want to manage. So I'm just going to hop on over to our extraction screen so you can see the different modules we have, the different areas, and I'm just going to expand them all. So we can get user information, which is really nice if you are in the Oracle Cloud or actually anywhere else, to be able to pull out any type of user information, assign users, create them, do what you need to without having to actually go into EPPM web or anything like that. It does make it very easy to manage those users. We can handle all of the global information that you might want to. So anything from OBS to EPS to codes, UDFs, um, anything that you might want to handle at that global level, which in most tools you can't even touch that global data. The same with roles and resources. We can handle all kinds of items that are uh, involved with resources. So rates, build the resource, do roles, things of that nature. We can also get to the risk information if you do any type of risk management in P6. We have our usage sheets, which are part of our utilities that we provide. And these are really helpful to go and see where your global information is being used in each project, how many times, and really can aid uh, cleaning up your database to get rid of some of those codes that and things that you are not using anymore. We also can get to any of the project information that you might need, including those baselines that Ian talked about. You don't have to detach them or anything like that. It will pull them straight from where they reside in the project. We also have any type of activity information that you might want to handle. Now, in conjunction with, of course, those projects that you might want to work with, we have the availability to see every project in your database that you're connected to. So you could drill down to where you wanted to go. You could search for it, um, and you could select from where you are. You could select, you know, one project. You could do several, however many you want, and they'll all come out in the same sheet there. So, one example I do like to show, probably more so for the engineering companies that might be spinning up several different databases for different clients, is the ability to take the structure from one database and put it into the new database. So, making it very easy to spin up a new database. So in my example, I'm going to actually take out the OBS and the EPS structure from from a database that is already existing here. So I'm going to pull out this structure along with the OBS structure, and then I'm going to create a new database that is essentially blank. So I have a brand new database that's been spun up here, and I don't have any OBS structure, nor do I have any EPS structure. So I want to spin this up pretty quickly in order to get my database up and running. So with P6-Loader, I can select the OBS and the EPS. I don't have any projects that are involved with this global data, so I don't need to select any projects. And then I just tell P6-Loader to extract that information. Once it's extracted, I can download it and it will come and open in Excel for me. So, a few things I'd like to just visit quickly on sheets that we're working with P6-Loader. Now, when they're pulled out, they have some color coding across the top telling me what type of data and what I can do with it for each module. So you can see I have OBS and EPS. So I get a sheet for each module that I pulled out. On each sheet, I'm going to have at least one column that is a red background. That background lets me know that in order for me to work with the OBS, I need to have this column called name. It's mandatory in order for me to work with my OBS. Now we also pull out some information here on some modifications. We do have some other informational items on like projects and things that come out. And so these are optional data, of course. So if I don't want to deal with those right now, or if I I don't need them, I can simply take that gray piece, and I can delete them out. It's not going to hurt anything when I load it back up because I still have my name column here. Now, if I wanted to remap one of my columns that is mandatory, I can use the orangish colored font column. So in this case, if I wanted to rename my EAI OBS element, I could put it here. P6 would go out, it would change it, and I would be ready to go. Now, the blue columns, these are columns that are also optional. However, they're data that you can manipulate. You could change it, you can add, whatever. If I, of course, did not want to work with some of them, because some of these sheets tend to get a lot of columns across because we are pulling out of a lot of data. I can simply remove the ones that I'm not working with and narrow it down to just those that I want to manipulate or handle. Now I'm just going to pop over to the EPS so that you can see that not all sheets have just one mandatory field in them. I do have several in order to work with my EPS. So in this case, I need my EPS ID, my EPS name, as well as the OBS ID that goes along with it. And you can see an example here where I have some summary data that's informational for me when I do pull out uh, that EPS information. So what I want to do is essentially clean up both my OBS and my EPS and load it into my new database. So I've already done that in a sheet, and I've done some additional items as well. So what I have here is column D called cleanup. P6-Loader doesn't know what cleanup means. It doesn't recognize that particular column header. Now, it doesn't matter whether it's red or not in the background. What P6-Loader keys on is the name of the column. So I've added this column, and this is what I pulled out. Then I cleaned it up. I made everything capital, and I named my new column to load in names so that it's going to create those OBS names out there. I found that I wanted to add two additional OBS elements, and I do have a corresponding EPS that's coming in with it as well. Now, in this case, I've cleaned up the EPS for the ones that I want to get in there right away. I want to get working in that database. So I cleaned up that portion. However, I have some other stuff that I want to deal with later. What I can do is I can leave a blank line between the data above that I want to load in and the data that I don't want to load. P6-Loader will go along, read those rows, and stop loading in data at the blank line. It will do that as well with columns. So if you wanted to, just keep columns in there and just add a blank column, it will load up to that point, and then it will stop reading those columns. So let's go ahead and just load this into the database that I'm creating. So first of all, I need to log out and log into the database that I actually want to work with. And I'm just created it. So all I have is an admin user. And then I can go and I can browse to where I have that file saved. I can select it and then just tell P6-Loader to upload that file. It's going to go out, it's going to create those new elements in my new database. When I go back to the database, I can refresh it and I can see that I have everything all loaded in, as well as the responsible managers or OBS that is associated with each one of those EPS levels. Now, another thing, I talked a little bit about cleanup and those usage sheets that we could pull out. Well, in the case of this, I'm using a utility. I'm using that activity code roll down utility. So in my database here, um, let me open up my project that I want. I have a couple of activity codes that are kind of all over the place. I have some duplicates. I've got some that are at the wrong level. I want to push those down, and I want to combine those duplicate lists so that I have one code with a combined dictionary from those lists that were created separately. Um, so, in order to do that, I would essentially pull out my activity codes. I would grab the ones that I want to work with, and I can tell P6-Loader that this is a global code. It has this name, and I want to roll it down to the EPS level. So I'm going to roll my phase down to the EPS level. In the case of my equipment, those were at two different levels, but they were the same dictionary. They should be the same code, and I want to combine those dictionaries and reassign them. This also needs to be an EPS code. So these three are ones that are needed at in that EPS node, just not globally. I also, of course, would need to identify which EPS I want to have it associated with. In the case of my specs, um, I want to combine those two. They were two separate ones that were made. They are actually the same thing. So I'm going to combine them. And to combine them, I just give them the same name. So in the spec section, I'll rename that. It's going to take these two codes and combine them. The same goes with that equipment code up at the previously that I talked about. Finally, I have my work order code. It's at the global level, and really it's a project, it's project information. It doesn't need to be used anywhere else. So I can roll that down. And of course, in the case of projects, I would give it a project ID that I want to associate that new code with. My last column here is going to tell P6-Loader, what do you want to do with that original code? Do I want to delete these or at that global level or EPS or wherever they reside? Or do I want to keep them? Maybe I need to analyze them some more, make sure that I don't have any other projects. And so I could pull those usage sheets again. Um, and so I'm going to keep most of them, except for I do know that the work order is not it does not need to reside at the global level. There's no more cleanup to be done. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that one. So if I go into P6, first of all, I do need to change back to my database. That is my demo database. And I can go and browse again to upload that file. And then I can go out and submit it. Um, P6 is going to go out, or P6-Loader is going to go out. It's going to take all of those codes, roll them down, combine them, what have you, and uh, make those changes in the database in the project. And when I refresh, I can see that, of course, they're not assigned anymore because I told them I was changing them or I was pushing them down. So at my EPS level, here's my equipment. And I do have my new phase as well. And then at the project level, I now have my specs and my work order that I can deal with. And if I go back to my global and I look for my one P6L work order, it's not there. So it has been removed in this case. So when I apply this, I can see that I have my new phase that's been assigned. I have my equipment combined and reassigned, as well as my specs, and my work order is now pushed down to the project level. So really easy way to clean up your database, and not have to go in and move everything around, create them, reassign them. It does it all in basically one fell swoop. Now, one of the big things is, how do we handle project information? So I'm essentially going to go through an example of where I am going to load in um, a brand new project, and I'm going to load in everything I need for that project. So I'm going to go in and do calendars and logic and assign resources and roles and such. So what that looks like, and this is a fairly large load or sheet or workbook, I guess, um, that I'm going to load. But keep in mind, I'm handling everything all at once. You don't have to do this all at once. You could piecemeal it as you get information in from your team or what have you. But I this is just an easy way to kind of cover all of those. So I can build out my WBS. I can put in my hierarchy that I have. So I have my mining, extraction, and upgrader, and I have some children to each one of those. And so I can set those up. I can set all of the settings at the WBS level that I might want to set. Now, in this case, I need to create some project codes. So I've got some project codes that I'm going to create. And then, or I'm sorry, activity codes. I have some activity codes at the project level that I'm going to create, and then I can actually populate them as well. So I would take my code type, um, tell it what scope, and then I can go and build out that dictionary for each one of those codes. On my activities, I can create those. Uh, in this case, what I'm doing is I'm using the functionality in Excel to help me out a little bit. So I have an additional column that I've named title, and I'm taking this column and two of my project codes, and I am concatenating them to build out my name of my um, activity. Now, I don't have to, I can leave the formula in there. P6 Loader is going to actually read the result of that formula. As long as your data is all in this workbook, P6 Loader does not have to, uh, or you don't have to copy and paste like values after you've used a, a formula. It'll automatically read what is the result of that formula. I might want to build out some expenses and I might need some cost codes for that. So I could build out my cost code structure as I am going forward and needing to put in those cost codes. I can create steps. So in the case that maybe I had, the same information that was required for several different value or several different activities, I could actually take a copy and then put my new activity ID in there and actually duplicate those very quickly. Now we can also handle calendars. So in this case, I need a resource calendar for my project, for my resources. And it's a rotating calendar. So, if you've ever tried to build out a rotating calendar and define it within P6, it can get a little bit tricky, and there's kind of some room for error when you're doing that. Um, as you're counting out and you're looking at those exceptions, um, counting 10 days that you're working, then 4 days that you're off, and then count 10 more that you're working, there's some room for error there. So we can define that calendar. We can mark the work times that are possible. And then on our exceptions, what we can do is we can again use the functionality in Excel to define those different days off or those exceptions to that calendar using a formula. So makes it really easy to make sure you're accurate, you're counting properly, etc. when you are doing something like a rotating calendar. I also need to add in a contractor resource code. So I can do that and I can populate it. We can also build in that hierarchy that you might need in your code values. Now, on this sheet, I am creating my resources that I need for this project. I'm assigning that calendar that I just defined. Now, P6-Loader knows what order in which to load these sheets to create the information. So no matter where in my workbook I have my calendar defined, P6 Loader knows it needs to create the calendar before it assigns it. The same goes with the resource codes that I need to assign. It knows that it needs to create those codes first and then assign them. So you don't have to worry about what order you put those sheets. P6 Loader knows what order to actually put them or to load them in. Now, I also have my resource assignments that I can handle. So I've got my activity, my project ID, my role ID, maybe some cost accounts, and I've also started to do some planning um, in in respect to my resources here as well. Now, of course, no project is really complete without the logic. So we can develop those relationships in within our project. We can also handle cross project relationships. So if you have a case where you've gotten maybe a schedule from a contractor and you need to do some cross project relationships to tie in uh, that schedule into your master project, you could pull out those relationships the first time that they are created, and then with the subsequent updates you get, you could very easily run a uh, a relationship to tie or a relationship sheet to tie in those cross project relationships very easily. So there's a place to put the project as well as the activity ID. You can set your type as well as include any lag that you need to. Now, we can also handle resource rates. So let's say I have some shifts that I need some different rates on. I can set those up within my resource rate sheet. I could concentrate maybe on just my 7 a.m. shift and make sure that all of my price per unit and all that is good. And then perhaps then look at my 7 p.m. shift. So making it very easy to, again, use the functionality of Excel to allow me to work with my data. So let's go ahead and load in this project. So again, I'm going to browse to where I have that new project set up and upload it. It's going to go out, it's going to create all those elements we just went over, and it's going my project is going to be ready to start work on. Um, when it's complete, I can go in and I can refresh my data. And first of all, I want to show you that I am going to put my resources into this P6 Loader parent tree. So when I refresh, I'm going to come in and see that I have that new parent that has all those resources under it. My calendar's been assigned, my roles, everything I needed. And then on my project, I have all of my logic, my resources are assigned, my roles are assigned, and I've started my planning for my project as well. So pretty darn easy to work with a lot of different data within P6. Now, I did talk about, or Ian and I talked about being able to work with baselines in P6 or that are assigned in P6. So I have a project here that I baselined, and I have found number one, that I do need to have some costs moved around, and I have some found work. So I have an activity I want to add, not only to the baseline, but also to the project itself. So if I go into that sheet where I handle my baselines, I essentially pulled this out, extracted it with P6-Loader. It gave me all of my activities for my baseline as well as my project, but I got rid of all the ones for my project because I didn't need to deal with those, except in the case of my found work. So I've got my found work here, and I'm adding it both to my project as well as my baseline. And I pulled out the planned labor costs as well as the planned labor units so that I could debit and credit a couple of these back and shift around my costs. So I pulled it out. I added another column to help me just do my debits and credits, and then used a formula to make sure that what I am loading back into my costs and my units, if I scroll over here a little bit, and my units, um, it's calculating that for me so that I don't mess up my values when I do that. So once I have those uh, set, and perhaps I don't need to work with my other values, these ones that aren't yellow highlighted, I could actually go and I could uh, narrow it down to just those changes I'm going to make. So I can load this sheet like this um, after I deleted each one of those ones I'm not working with, and then just load this small portion of of this data there. So let's go and load up my changes, and then we'll see those changes reflect in P6. So when I go back and refresh in P6, I've got my added work here at both the project and my baseline. I've got my debits and my credits on those two or four um, activities that I needed to move around. So um, easily manipulate data in your database or in your baselines as you have things that you need to update in those baselines as well. Um, the last thing I want to show you is working with projects and updating. So in this case, I have two projects that I'm going to put my first update into. So right now, they have not been statused at all. And what I want to do is I want to load in my progress for these. Now, in the case of my resources, not only do I want to put in that progress, but I am actually wanting to put that information in different time periods. So I've set up my time periods, and I have different values for different time periods on this update. So one of the ways that I could easily make a sheet that I and go out and provide that for my team that's going to be updating is on extractions in some cases, and where we have a pencil that is next to a particular sheet, I can decide what columns I want to pull out. So we can also save those. We can save those definitions and bring those out. So if I go down into my save and load definitions down here in my lower right hand corner, and I pop that open, I can see that I have a definition for project updates. So every time I pull for a sheet to provide for those that don't necessarily get into P6, I can save it and I can then pull it every time I want to do updates, maybe filter it for, an activity code or for a department or something like that. And I can just pull out what I want to on here. So you can see on the left, these are the columns that are not going to come out. On the right, I'm going to have my project ID, my name, status, percent complete, etc. I can also decide whether or not I want user defined fields or codes to come over. So I'm not bringing out any user defined fields or codes in this case because these are two really small projects. I've also already marked the projects that I want to pull that information out for. So it's as simple as setting this up once, saving the definition, and then loading it to extract that information. So I've already extracted it, and I've gotten my sheet back from my team. So they have put the status, whether it was complete or in progress, a percentage. They've given me actual start dates on all of them. Um, the milestones, of course, only need a start date. I provide the planned start date so that it's easier for my user to simply copy and paste into the actual start date. Then if they need to, adjust the date or whatever, it's already in the format they need, and they just need to change the date. Now, in my resource assignments, I am handling units in this case, but you can do costs, you can do remaining units, remaining costs, things like that. But I'm just handling units in this case. So for my FP spread one, I am spreading that across 2 months on one of my resources. In the case of my FS or my F spread 3, I'm going to update for June all of my resources and their units in this case. So again, going over into P6-Loader, going to grab this sheet that's been updated and upload it. And it's very easy now to go back in and hit F5 to refresh and see I do, my updates are in and they're very quick. So on my F spread one, I can see my 2 time period buckets for my units. And on my F spread 3 in June, all of my units have been um, progressed as well. So just a lot of great things that you can do with P6-Loader. Um, it's just, that, like I said, this is kind of food for thought because it can do so many other different things. Now, one thing I want to quickly touch on is some new functionality that we have. We do have the ability to automatically back up your data, either in an XML format for your projects or in a P6-Loader format. So I have my databases set up to back up. And essentially, I can back them up um, daily, I can back them up weekly, and I can decide according to their status how I want to back them up. So I may want to back up all of my active projects daily. Those are ones that are being actively worked on. Maybe my planned projects too. As they're moving forward, I want to back them up every day so that if I do have to roll them back for some reason, I have them. Now, in the case of some of those other ones that might not change as frequently, I might want to just do a weekly backup on. So perhaps I want to do a weekly backup on my what ifs, my inactives, and maybe my template projects. Now, once I have this set up to run, I'm going to be able to go in and I'm going to be able to see that each day these backups are occurring. And if I want to perhaps restore a project, I can go and I can download that zip file for that project. And then I am able to see, I'm just going to open that up really quickly if it's going to open for me. Nope, went on the other thing. I can see that I have several that I've brought out as P6 and or so Excel sheets, and I can also bring them out in an XML format. So by default, an XML format will come out. I can signify in P6-Loader which projects and if I want global data to come out as well. So I can also back up my global data. So with that, I don't see any questions right now in the question room or on the chat. So if you do have them, go ahead and put your questions in. I can answer them, or Ian can, as the case may be. And I'll turn it back to Ian to wrap everything up.
Thanks, Sue. Um, just waiting for the control to come back.
You may have to take it back. I don't know if I
Yeah,
can.
I just did.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, so we'll just wrap it up real quick here. First thing is, it's always nice to get feedback from some of our customers. Here's some of the things that we've heard from some of our customers. Um, uh, People generally, what we find is people who start using it end up finding they use it more and more and more. I don't think we've ever had somebody use P6-Loader and then say, "Oh, I'm not getting value from it." What ends up happening is people say, "Oh, I decided I could use it for this and this and this," and they expand their use of the tool over time. Um, so again, depending on what you're doing, whether you're a scheduler or a planner or whatever, P6-Loader can be used for many different things. Um, a few of our customers, we have customers all over the world using P6-Loader in a number of different industries. Um, some utilities, oil and gas, construction companies. As I said, people all over the world use this tool. And we can help get it implemented as well. So, we can help people if you need to write a macro to work with P6-Loader. If you need some training for your people on how to use P6-Loader, we can do all of those things for you. Um, we are a one-stop shop for all things Oracle Primavera. We have the tools, we have the services, and we're also a certified trainer. We've been around since since the early 90s. We've been a Primavera solution provider since 1995. We've been a platinum partner of Oracle since 2009. We work in many industries, and we have a number of add-ons that make Primavera tools easier for people to use. So, as Sue said, we asked for questions in the chat. So there's a couple of questions here. Is it valid for all duration types and percent complete types? Yeah, absolutely. You can toggle between the types if you want to in using P6-Loader. You can enter values in any of the types as well. It's all available. Um, I think Sue answered that in the chat, but if there's any other questions, feel free to put them in either the questions section or in the chat section, and we'll be happy to get them answered. And while we're waiting for that, I'm going to put Sue's contact information up here. So if you think of anything you'd like to ask after the fact, or if you'd like to discuss your specific requirements, we can certainly have that discussion with you. There's also a question here about what about pricing? I'd ask you to reach out to Sue because we have different levels of P6 loader depending on requirements. So um, we have we have a version just for standalone users. We have a version for small job sites, and then we have our professional and corporate versions, um, which add some of the additional functionality, like multiple databases and some of the utilities and things like that. So if you'd like to just reach out to Sue, she can discuss pricing with you. All right. So if there's no other questions, we'll wrap it up. Thanks for joining us today. We're a couple minutes early, but not much. So we pretty much used all of our time. Again, thanks for joining us. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us.